one or both as we go through today. And welcome, you brave souls who come on a Friday afternoon. My goodness. Okay. So we'll get started. And let's see. Hopefully, Teresa, am I coming through all right? We didn't do a sound check, but okay, great. All right, we'll get started. So I am Jared Wright. I'm the elementary math and science assessment specialist. And so I oversee or help support Acadience math. And I'll let Teresa introduce herself.
I'm Teresa McIntyre. I am the language arts assessment specialist, and one of my responsibilities is Acadience reading.
Thank you, Teresa. I honestly can't remember. Are we doing breakout rooms today during this? No. So in the past, we have with this training, we've done breakout rooms, but Teresa and I have worked together so we'll show you a little bit of both things, and then you'll make a decision on what you're going to be looking at and reviewing. If you're in a room with a group of you are there physically together, that's great. You can discuss as we go through this today, and that should work out very well. So first question, you can see there at the bottom of the slide, what data set will you be analyzing today? So what's your focus? Are you going to be focusing on Acadience reading or Acadience math? And you can always do a little of both depending on the time, or always take back what you've learned and what you've gone through and do that for the other data set. But in the chat, if you would just put which data set you're planning on reviewing. Ooh, reading has it this time. Oh, good. We got a math. Thank you for that exclamation point as well. Okay. So we got some reading both or just math. Wonderful. Okay, that's helpful to know. That's kind of so that's what happened in the past is we've had people looking at both. And so rather than divide you up and really focus on certain ones, we'll talk through both so you can have information to be able to analyze that data.
Jared, would you unshare your slides and then share them back again? I just made an update to something.
Great. Now I'm going to have to mess it all up. Okay. You know what I have to do? I also have to sorry, just one moment.
So I am recording this for people who were not able to attend today, who still want to get the information. So on the composite score page will be a link to the participants notebook through my Padlet. And then for those of you who are here with me today, I'm going to drop the participants notebook link in the chat. Please click on that link and make a copy of the document. So don't request edit access, just make a copy of the document, which then makes it yours, and then you can use it throughout the training today.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. And I think it's updated by then. Okay, so we've done it and we're good to move on. So kind of mentioned this, but we're going to really focus on just Acadience data. So you can focus on whether it's math or reading or both, however you want to manage that. We're going to focus, at this time, we're focusing on the class level data, and then really getting in and analyzing student data. And we're going to focus on well, we're also including, you have tier 1 and then tier 2 and tier 3 instruction. And so as we analyze the data, thinking about just those levels, we'll actually start off at a higher level, the composite score, and thinking about tier 1 instruction, and then we'll narrow our focus as we go down into the data. As far as if you have questions or want to make a comment, feel free to either put that in the chat or come off mute, and we can take that through either method. So Teresa did share the participants notebook. Not yet. Let's see. Oh, there's the link on the slide. So you'll want to use the participant notebook, so you can either pull that link off and put it into your browser. Here we could also, oops.
Yeah, for today, I just used the link in the chat. This is for people who are just watching the video later, for you to have access to the participants notebook.
Thank you. So, and yeah, thank you for putting that into the chat. We've had people joining, and that's one of the downsides with Zoom, is it doesn't keep it in there. So you have to keep adding it as people join. All right, so we're going to utilize the participant notebook. It will look like this. As we go through, it has the learning intentions. It has a table of contents with the different areas bookmarked that you can use as we go through this. And we'll refer to the different pages within the notebook as we move through today. So first off, thinking about the composite score, there are 4 things that that the composite score can help us with. The first one is giving us the likelihood of success for a student on the next benchmark. So, and you can see the colors as far as you have red is well below. So students who are scoring well below on the benchmark have a 10 to 20% chance of meeting at benchmark in the future. And then you can see that just increases as you go up to where the blue is 90%. So this is one of the reasons why we are working with those who score in the well below and below area, because we're trying to get them to be successful in the future on those benchmarks and increase that likelihood. The second thing that it can tell us is what kind of support a student might need. So as we look at the composite scores, we can see what, whether our core tier 1 instruction within the classroom is doing it for the students. They are good. So typically at benchmark or above benchmark, that tier 1 instruction is just fine for them. But then you have students who are well below or below that are going to need a little bit more support. So this, looking at that composite score, is going to give us that, okay, these students are going to need a bit more support. And then it shows which students are going to need that. As they're provided that instructional support, then they need to be progress monitored to see if that instruction is actually helping the students become more proficient and master those skills. And then also at a high level, informing system level decisions. So looking at it from a district or a school or even a grade level, and seeing what seems to be going well and what doesn't in making certain decisions. The other thing to think about, as far as you can see, push for blue, and this isn't because I am wearing blue, but it's not because I'm a BYU fan. So, but on the left side, These are students who are at benchmark at the end of kindergarten, and that's what that KEOY, so kindergarten end of year. And then it follows the data follows those students, you can see, and the data for third grade end of year. And then you could see on the right side, the above benchmark, and you can see students who scored in the above benchmark category, the blue, at the end of kindergarten, and what it looks like as they go up to third grade. And so you'll notice our reason for pushing for blue. Sometimes we're just happy that a student is at benchmark, and that's great. But if there are students that are at benchmark and hitting that green level, you can see if we can push them to blue and continue to help them progress, the way that the data looks, if they're at above benchmark, they're a lot more likely to remain above benchmark. Whereas if they're at benchmark, there's a lot more distribution there. There's still tends to be more at and above, but just trying to push students to be that, to hit that above benchmark if possible. And then also just this, students at the above benchmark level are considered as reading grade level. So as far as the analysis that we're going to look at today, so when this is ALO, and these students, we took them from a report and just put them on this slides, but you can see there are students with the green and students with blue and then red and then yellow. And so in the participant notebook, what we've done is we have this chart to help you kind of organize the data as you think about it. So the big question that we're going to ask or try and answer with this data for the composite score is, does core instruction need to be adjusted? That's what we're focusing on. If there are a lot of students that are at or above, then we're doing really well and core instruction should be just fine. But if there are quite a few students who are below or well below, we might need to think about what we're doing for our core instruction and how we might adjust that to support more students. So as we look at this, well below benchmark, so this hashtag is we're looking for the numbers. So there are 3 students out of all of these 17 that are well below, and then you have below are 3 at benchmark, the green, 5, and then above is 6, the blue. And then just the percentages of that, you can see there, looking at what those percentages are. And then we have a place for combining the at and above and combining the below and well below. So you have 65 and 35. And there's also a place if you're wanting to put specific students' names within that area. Oops. So that, excuse me, I am going the wrong way. So this is what we're going to be kind of pulling out our composite scores to start to analyze that. We have 2 reports. Well, we have some reports that are going to help in getting that data. So we still are including ADM. There are some districts that use ADM for Acadience math, but the large majority use ALO for Acadience math. And then, as you're aware, for Acadience reading, ALO is the only option. So you have your class view or student list view that we're going to look at. So you'll want to make sure that you are logged into ALO and you can view your class. Also make sure make sure that you've selected the data that you want to look at, whether that's reading or math. And so we're gonna, so this would be the student list. You can see that in the middle. Student list is one area that you can look at. And then there's also, here, I'm getting a little further. There's also a benchmark overview list. So if I'm in a student list, click on benchmark overview, it will give me another way to look at the data. And this is where I can see the N size or the number of students. So Jocelyn, let me back up and we'll go through it. So make sure you're logged into ALO. And then I'm in a demo site, so the way I get in is a little different, but you want to make sure that you are at the student list view. So you can see your classes or your class. Okay, so you'll want to make sure you're into, and up in the top left is reading or math. So you want to make sure you've selected which data you're looking at, reading or math. And then you should be on a view that looks like this. It has a student list and it's got your students there as you scroll down. ALO defaults to all. So most likely, if you have just data for beginning of year, you wouldn't see middle or end of year. And you wouldn't see some of this on this side. You would just have the students with beginning of year. If you select the time of year, so if I select B for beginning of year, then I see the composite score next to the student, and I see the different measures, scores as I move to the right. So you've got the composite, and then you've got the different measures that make up that composite score. Now you can sort and filter based on that score. So since we're focusing on the composite score, it's this RCS for reading composite score. And if I click on the left of that, I can sort. So I could sort based on low to high, or I can sort from high to low. Well, that's interesting that that's there. Yeah, so no green. Then on the right side of the title is a filter. So if I just wanted to filter certain students, I just wanted to focus on maybe below, well below and below. Then if I filter, it's only going to show me those students that have a composite score that is below or well below. And then I can remove that filter. So I can sort up or down, or I can filter based on what I want to find. So that's your class list. Now to get to where I was, so we have the data looking like this. If you go to the right, there's a V-shaped little green V. That's for a drop down to give you different views. So if I click on that, one of my options is called a benchmark overview. So if I click on that benchmark overview, now the data for that class, so I had that list of students, now the data is still there. This is still the same data. It's just in a different way of viewing it. So I have my composite score at the top, and then you're not going to have the middle of year and end of year, but you have this beginning of year. And as I scroll down, it shows me the different measures. And this is an overview of all the students within that student list. And if I hover over the color, it's going to give me the number of students. There are 10 students that are well below in the composite score of my overall students, of that 16. students. So 10%, 10 of those 16 are well below. There is also this, it's kind of a blended bar that goes below, and that's a combination of yellow and red. And then I can hover over blue. So that's how I get to the benchmark. Are there any questions about finding the benchmark? I think it's, yeah, Suzanne. As we go through this. So that'll be something that's coming up. There isn't a really specific called out print button. So if you're someone that likes to use paper forms, you just, whatever screen is displaying, if that's something you want to have the data. However you print, so I typically just right click and bring up the menu where I can print. Where I can print it, or I can Control P, or I can go up to the browser with the 3 little dots, and however you print that part. So if I push print at this benchmark overview, it brings up this, it actually has the rainbow shape, but it includes the data out to the side, since you can't hover over anything and have it show up. So when you print it, it's going to show that data for you. And then I can save it as a PDF, or I can just print it out. Let me see if I can go in a little bit so you can see that. So it prints it, so it still has that rainbow shape, but it includes the percentages in each category, and it shows the number of students in each category. And then as you scroll through, it goes through each of the specific measures with that same data. So this is a way to see your class as an overview rather than just your student list. And the same could be said as far as printing out your student list. If I'm at my student list, and I sort it how I want, maybe I just, I want to sort it with lows first, it really wouldn't matter, or highs. Then if I go to I right click and I print, now it's going to print or create a PDF of my class with that information. So, okay, so that's what we're going to be looking at, is the class information. So whether you feel comfortable looking at your student list, or whether you want to toggle to benchmark overview, that's going to be up to you how you want to manage that. A couple of things that I've put in here just for Acadience Math. There are documents to connect or align the Utah core standards with the different measures that are being administered in Acadience Math. And so there's information there as you're looking at it. Also, sometimes people talk about practicing or working on specific measures. So like with math, oh, my student didn't do very well with next number fluency, so we've really got to work on next number fluency. And just to call out that it's not working on a specific test. It is working on the skills that test is measuring. So if it's next number fluency, well, we need to work on strategic counting and working through that, not let's just practice this test over and over. Okay, so just a kind of nuance there. And I will get the documents in the chat in a minute. I'll put those in. So while you're taking some time to work through the composite scores, I'll add those math documents into the chat. Okay. Are there any questions about, one, having access to the participant notebook, you can see in the top right of this slide, reading is on page 3 and math is on page 4. So whichever one you're focusing on, if you're here for both, you can start with, and you can move to the other or just do the other at a different time. But we'll give you about 10 minutes to work through this. So if you have questions as you're working through this, Teresa and I are here to respond to any questions that you might have. But we're just going to give you this time to Yeah, Teresa has some resources on a Padlet as well.
Yeah, I'll drop those in the chat in just a minute.
All right, our 10 minutes is up. Hopefully that gave you some time to get start looking at the composite score data. We're going to move through, but you can continue to look at that as we go. All right, so this slide will let me go. So we're going to take about 5 more minutes, and you can continue to analyze the data, or if you've done that, just reflecting on the data. So are you needing to adjust your tier 1 instruction or do more scaffolding within your whole class instruction based on the data that you're seeing? And if so, okay, what are you like, how are you going to do that? What are you going to do? What might be some specific strategies that you might use? And as you're reflecting, if any questions come up of like, I'm not sure what strategies I might use, feel free to throw out those questions into the chat and we can have people respond as we're reflecting on the data. So we're going to take 5 minutes to do that. Are there any questions before we begin? Okay. I will take time to reflect on what you're seeing in the data. And you'll notice out to in the slides, just out to the right, that's the page number that it is in the participant notebook. So page 5 has these questions that you can add to your participant notebook and respond to. Right, our 5 minutes are up, so we'll stop reflection. There is a question in the chat I'm wondering if people have thoughts about. So any suggestions on how to help students grow in their math besides teaching to the test? Anyone out there have thoughts about what you do just to help students grow? Yeah, thank you for adding things into the chat. Appreciate that. Rocket Math, progress monitoring. And really it goes, yeah, there you go. Different games, concepts, different monitoring. It really goes back to thinking about the different skills that are actually being assessed. So if a student isn't doing well in a certain test, rather than practice that measure, it's focusing on, okay, which of these skills might a student need, and then looking to find resources around those skills. And thank you for putting stuff in the chat. That is helpful. Now I've got to get back to where I was. All right, so that's a composite score at a high level. We can look at how students are doing, how a class is doing, how is my tier 1 instruction going for students. Then we're going to go down a little bit further. So now we're looking at specific measure level data. So a couple of things that a composite score doesn't tell us. One is, excuse me, the two are one, instructional focus, and that's kind of happened in our chat here with the questions. Like, okay, these students might need support, but what type of support do they need? What do I need to focus on as far as providing instruction? Or where are the gaps in their literacy or numeracy skills? I'm not sure. At a composite level, I just know there might be some gaps there. It's flagged for me, but now I need to dig into the measure level. And then also looking at what skills might I progress monitor. And that was mentioned by several of you in the chat as far as monitoring progress of students based on particular skills. And so looking at measure level data is going to help us with those two areas that a composite score doesn't support us with. So as we look at the measure level data, and again, this is pulled, you can be looking at your, let me go back to my student list. So I'm looking at my student list, making sure B is selected so that I can see my measures and my composite score. So I have my student list. So as I look at that student list, this is sorted based on composite score. And so the first thing I want to pay attention to are students who are below or well below in those composite scores. So these 6 right here, they're below or well below. Okay, those 6 are going to need support as I look a little bit deeper into what the measure level scores are showing me. And then I'm also looking at measure level scores and students who might have a below or well below score in their measure. So maybe they're at or above in their composite score. But as I look at this Mildred Franklin or Kendra Norris, I look at the specific measures. And for Mildred, this measure right here, she is below benchmark on that score. And then Kendra is below in this one. So those students could use some support in those specific measures. So I'm looking at the composite score first, and then specific measures that are below or well below. And then a couple of things that I'm sure you're well aware of, but this is only one set of data. So thinking about, you've had a student for a month and a half probably about now. So the students' classroom performance as you've seen them in class, as you've done instruction. What does it look like for that student, and what might they need support with? And then students who are near the benchmark cut point. So students who are just barely over that at benchmark, to try and support them and shore that up, because from beginning to middle and then middle to end, those scores, those benchmark cut points increase. And so we're wanting to support students to make sure they're going to be at or above benchmark for the future, remembering that it's going to increase the likelihood of them being successful on the benchmarks in the future. That's why we're looking at and above. So we do on reading is pages 6 through 9, and math is pages 12 through 14. But we're really we're going to give you 10 minutes to go through each of the measure level data and list out the students, so you can list the measure that you're looking at, and then the student names. And we're focusing on students who are in those 3 categories of just above the benchmark. So they're at benchmark, but they're just above that cut point. And then students who are below or well below the benchmark. And then there is a link in the slides, which I will add to the chat. It is a document. This is from the math side, but I thought they were great questions to ask myself as I'm looking at the measure level data. So you can see the different measures, and then some possible questions that you might ask yourself as you're looking at the data, which can be helpful to kind of prompt look at. And let me put that in the chat. If you're looking at the math, this might be helpful. Are there any questions before I start the timer as far as looking at the measure level scores? All right, I will start the timer, and Teresa and I are here to support as you're going through those scores and analyzing them.
I have a question.
Yeah,
So we were just wondering, we're talking in my team here about, like some of our, like what are our next steps now that we've looked at our data and we've kind of identified some students that we know we can work with. In the old Acadience program, it had like, groups, you could put your kids into groups and it give you like little lessons for them and like little, like sounding out activities and like, you know, anyway, does this program have those? Is what my question is. Teresa's shaking her head saying no.
No, no, it does not.
But do you know what I mean
ALO,
though?
what?
You know what I mean though? Like what I'm
Yes.
referring.
Oh, yeah. No, I do. Acadian M class had the activities based on their scores that you could utilize. ALO recommends using an intervention program specifically for students and figuring out what holes they have, and they do not have anything like that. So ALO does not have any curriculum type things, and M class had a lot of curriculum, which is where they got those ideas from.
So the curriculum, are they recommending a certain like intervention program or they're just saying like use your own?
They're not. They're just
Best
saying use
practices.
whatever intervention program that you have for
Okay.
support for the students.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
How about you?
Okay, our 10 minutes is up as far as looking at measure level data. And I notice a lot of chat going on in the chat, which is great. Appreciate people sharing thoughts and their experience. That's one of the benefits of having teachers join from all over. A lot of different experiences and information that they can share. So, Teresa, do you want to just talk through this initial? So what we're going to look at now, we've looked at the measure level, but sometimes even the measure level can use some digging into to support students. So we're going to touch on the reading, and then I'll mention or talk through the math side of even getting a little more specific about the data.
Yeah. So when you're looking at the actual scoring, right, for each individual student, and you're pulling up the different measures that they took, you're going to want to really look at what they got correct, incorrect, or was skipped. So you can see the different symbol or different assessment measures and what it looks like if the student got the item correct. And if they got it incorrect, it's always going to be red. And if they just skipped over it, it's always going to be blank. So as you're doing your error analysis and really looking in why students are making mistakes, what mistakes they made, keep these three things in mind. So in order to see the scoring, Jared, do you want to bring up the ALO site real fast? Just click on a student's name. You'll choose assessments. Choose that oral reading fluency, next one right there. And once you click on that measure, then you're going to actually see the students' responses and how they were scored. At the bottom, you will also see any notes or patterns of response that were indicated for the student. Because this is fluency, it's going to have all three passages there for you to review. You can see the response patterns that were noted and any notes that were made about that student's performance. Thanks, Jared.
Nice. Student can
Sorry.
resell. Wow.
Teresa,
Sorry.
Yeah,
can
go
you
ahead.
repeat how do we find, how we get to that?
Yes. So from the student list, you just click on a student's name. And then you're going to see their overview. So all of the graphs, which includes their grade level graphs and any progress monitoring they're enrolled in. You're going to select assessments. And then you can just click on the measure. A lot of this data has just been input manually, and so it doesn't actually have scoring data. So if there's a little gray box on the right side with a check mark in it, that says it was digitally administered and you can actually see the data. For most of the reading, it's going to be digitally administered. For most of your, depending on your grade level for the math or whether you opted in to do digital administration, you might not have that option. So go ahead and click that option, and then that brings up the actual scores and markings for the student.
Thank you for that.
Yep.
So Teresa, do we want to give time now or just go through math and then give time at the end?
I think everybody was doing reading, so we can probably give time right now to go look at the reading, because the math they may or may not have data for with them.
Right. Okay. So in your participant notebook on page 10, Let's look at what that's, so if I scroll down to page 10, you're gonna have a reading probe level analysis. So you have a place where you can enter the measure and then any patterns you might see. In this, you'll notice this is per student. So you can just select a few, a student, well, start with one and then move to another, but however many students you want to get to within that 5 minutes. But again, you're going from the student list, you're selecting a student, then you select assessments, and then you can select the student information. And then you'll be able to see that information. And then you can, as you look at that, determine maybe what kind of analyzing the errors that the student is making. So here are some questions that you can look at as you're reviewing. Are there any questions or help before we give you the 5 minutes to analyze, to do that error analysis? Okay. All right, so the 5 minutes gave you some time, hopefully, to look at that error analysis. As far as the question in the chat, sharing this presentation, this is being recorded, so we will post it to the USBE assessment YouTube channel. As far as if you're talking specifically for the slides, I think, Teresa, we can get those to them and share those out. I'm not sure if they're in the survey at the end. But we can get you the information. So looking at math, now we're going to shift over to math. So in looking at math, you have the same option within the ALO system. So for those measures that are administered digitally, for kindergarten and first grade in Acadience math, you can go to the same place. So if I go into ALO, you would need to make sure you're in the math data. And then you would click on a student, you would go to assessments, and then you would just need to find an assessment that the assessments that are administered digitally. Then you have the information there where you can see what a student got correct or incorrect, just the same as with reading. You can see that in the system. For those measures that are administered paper pencil for Acadience math, one is computation and another is concepts and application. For those, you can have those administer, or the computation can, the student responses can be entered into the ALO system, and then it will score it for you. And the information will be under the student information under that assessment. So if you administered, let's go back. So if you administered the computation and you entered scores for the student, here we go. So if it's manually, if you hand scored and did all of that, the information would not be here. You would need to use the student's worksheets. If you entered the student responses into the system and it scored it for you, then those responses would be here under the student information.
Sorry, I have a question. How do you
Yes.
enter those manual scores? Because I don't know where to do that.
It's a secret. No, it's let me show you.
Thank
The
you.
trick, the trick is that I don't know if the one I'm using now will show, but I can direct you. So hopefully if you've got it up, maybe you can see it. But since, so if I'm at my student list, whichever student I want to enter the scores for computation, if I go to the far right, there will be an icon that to me looks like a stoplight on its side with 3 circles in it. And if I hover over it, it says manual score entry. And when I click on that, it gives me the option of entering the scores. Let's see if I can.
Let's say choose a different grade and see if there's something that's not been entered yet.
Yeah, that's.
Well, that's not a lot of students. Oh,
No,
there
I
you
don't
go.
have
That
Yeah.
one would have worked.
until I went past.
Yeah. So just tick.
Oh, computation here.
Oh,
Yeah,
what? It's not going to let you because it's not a current year.
yeah, right. Yeah, I need to go to a different login as a different user. Maybe I can show that at a little bit later. I can log in as a different demo site. But and then I can show you how to enter it. But when you go to that light that's that icon that looks like a light on its side, when you click on that, then you go to comp and it will say enter student responses, and you click on enter student responses and it will bring up the worksheet that the student saw. And then you enter that information, and I'll log in with a different person to be able to show you that in a moment. But in thinking about with Acadience math, if you see the score of 10 on this worksheet that has a whole bunch of different types of questions, some subtraction, addition, and so on. Rather than, so if you think, well, need, if based on our conversation in the chat, we're not just going to tell the student, go faster, that's going to help you. Well, yeah, there is an aspect of going a little more quickly or being more fluent with how you respond, but really that 10 isn't as helpful for you providing instruction to the student. So knowing what specific skills a student has and which ones they need support with is what the analysis for a response pattern analysis. And so there are these pages in a student booklet, the student score booklet, that you can use. And the way you would mark it is with a circle if it's correct and X if it's incorrect, or a blank. But I'd like to show you. So in that Padlet that I shared, there is a column for response pattern analysis. And it comes up. The way that we kind of revised Acadience version of this is that you have all of the problems on those worksheets are the same throughout the year. They're testing the same skill at the beginning, middle, and end of year. So then you have the numbers from the worksheet, and then you have the skill that they're testing or assessing, and then you have the alignment to the standards on the right. And so this document can be used as you look at the student's worksheet. You can mark a circle for if the student's getting it correct, X through it if it's wrong, or leave it alone if it's blank. And this starts to dig into certain skills that a student might have versus what they need, and how then you can start to think about grouping students in that way. So hopefully it's a little small, but on the slide you can see they've been circled certain numbers and X through others based on how a student responded. And as you're looking at that, I can start to see, okay, the student seems to be getting the addition problems correct, but for subtraction, they're missing those. So if I'm going to support this student in a small group, I'm going to start looking at helping them with subtraction. No, that's a great question, Rebecca. It doesn't do this analysis for you, even if it's entered into the system. You would still need to look at the student responses and go through this page. So it does take additional time. If it was me, I would focus on students who are well below or below and try and get an idea of where they're at and how I can support them. My hope, and that's one of our enhancement requests, is that since it's a technology, like actually use some of this technology to be able to create forms like that. So that's a hope for the future. Oh, so here's an example for the question on entering student responses. So you see if you're on the student list, you would see the little light on its side. You would click on that, and then up pops, it has comp, manual, or digital. It defaults to digital. You'd leave it digital and you'd click enter student answers. And once you do that, you have a worksheet that comes up and you type in the student responses just as they've written it in the system, or on the worksheet, you type it into the system. And then you save that and it scores it for you. And then it also has that data in ALO rather than having to go back and look at student worksheet, the actual physical copy of the worksheets, it has the responses in ALO that you can refer to. All right, so with that, are there any questions? I'm gonna log out of my the demo site and try and get in so I can show you what it looks like, but we're gonna jump into grouping students. Are there any questions about what we've talked about so far? Okay. So looking at students and their grouping, you're wanting to focus on certain skills, and that's been mentioned in the chat by many of you as well. Thinking about what specific skills are they needing, and really focus on one of those skills. Don't try and do a whole bunch right off. That's what your progress monitoring and supporting students through that. Right. I can't remember, Teresa, if this is you or me, where the handoff was.
No, you can go ahead and do that. It's the next
Okay.
set of learning intentions.
Perfect. Okay. So as far as progress monitoring in that alignment, so it can be done with materials at or below the student's grade level, and you can set that up as we talk about progress monitoring more will be shown about that information, but you could do below a student's grade level if needed, just depending on where they're at and how to support their learning. You need to make sure the materials are matching the intervention you're providing. So again, that's been mentioned in the chat as well, but thinking about, okay, what skill am I going to help the student with, and making sure that the materials are matching that. And then just thinking about progress monitoring as a feedback loop. So it's helping you as you're providing instruction, as you monitor the student's progress, then it's going to let you know, oh, I need to make some adjustments because for some reason they don't seem to be getting it. Or it might see, oh, wow, they really got this. It's time to move on. We don't need to keep going through this. Let's move to another skill. So paying attention and using progress monitoring to give you the feedback you need from the student. Let's move to here. So as far as grouping students, so here you see a list of students. These are all students who scored well below on their composite score. And based on this list of well below, the question is, should I put these students all in the same intervention group? And what are some reasons why they would or why they would not be put in the same group? Go ahead and in the chat, give your response to, should they all be in the same group, why or why not? Or if you want to come off mute, you can do that as well. Okay, one response in the chat, not the same group, because some of them have higher scores in those subcategories. Put them in the grouping tool. Okay, there is a tool, yeah, that you can use to give you kind of an initial idea of where students might be grouped. Okay. Thank you for entering your thoughts into the chat. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even if that was your above grade level or above benchmark group, that might be too many to even put in a single group to really provide instruction, let alone with it being well below. Okay, yeah, Great, you guys are mentioning all the things we've talked about. So we're initially looking at the composite score. This is flagging the information to say, oh, these guys are all well below, but that's not where we end. We start to look at those subcategories, maybe even digging into student errors and what that looks like. So, and as has been mentioned in the chat, you have some of these where the student is at 100. They're really close to moving into that below benchmark. Whereas there's other students, like this one at the top is at 8. So 8 versus 100 can be quite a bit different depending on what skills we're looking at. So, and then you can also group based on the different measures and how they connect with each other that way. There is a question. Is it
I'm
possible
answering
to
it.
look? Oh, perfect. Teresa will answer your question. So a couple things to keep in mind as you're forming groups. Making sure the students who need the most, or students who have the most need, are provided instruction by the most qualified person. And then you have special ed students, general ed students can also, if they're at the same level, they can be grouped together and they can be supported by special education staff. They just need to not be in the special education room. And then just depending on your resources and the amount of time you have, really focusing on students who are below or well below. And for those students who are at or above, really the learning that they get is through the Tier 1 whole class instruction. However, if you have the time, you can definitely extend their learning and provide support for them as well. And then as far as forming groups, we do have this information in your participant notebook, but really when you're forming small groups, the system focuses on 2 skills that a student is working on or is needing support with. And it divides your class or the group of students into 4 different groups. The group 1 is students who are at or above on both of those skills or measures. Group 2 and group 3 just switch. So one category is students who are at or above in one skill and below in another skill, and then it flip-flops to group 3. And then group 4 is students who are below or well below in both. Teresa, do you want to respond to Teresa's question? Why can't they be in the SPED room?
Well, according to my friends in the special education department, it's a funding issue in that regular ed students are not supposed to be taught in the special education room because of all of the funding rules around special education. So you can bring that special education teacher somewhere else, or if your special education room is not labeled special education and it's just another room in the school, then that's also something you can do. But if you have questions about that, definitely reach out to the USBE special education staff.
And someone brought it up in the chat as far as the initial grouping. So if you go into whether it's reading or math, there is, and you're in your student list, beginning of year, there's a 4-square icon. If you click on the 4-square icon, that's what provides an initial grouping. It's not what it does is it groups the students based on 2 skills that the system is seeing as the most important at that time of year. So you can see group 1, both are at or above. Group 2 and group 3 just switch. So one is at and one is at and one is below. And so they just switch that. And obviously, as you're looking at this, if this may come up in your own class, but with one student in group 2 and 2 in group 3 as a group, just by one student, I'm gonna be more effective with my time. But this at least gives you some idea of, oh, okay, these are how they're doing on these specific skills. And so this is gonna maybe give me a starting point to start thinking about how to group the students. So that's this 4 square icon that you can then unclick. Are there any other questions? I know we've been keeping those going in the chat, but any that we haven't responded to up to this point?
In that grouping tool, can't you click on a measure and it will realign the group? That it will keep that group, but it will put them in order of a different measure. Yeah, so you don't.
Well, you can sort it. You can sort it, but
Just
it would sort them within that group. So you can, it looks like you can just sort, but it's keeping them in the same grouping.
Jared, do you want to stop sharing and I will go ahead and share?
Yep, I'll do that now.
Okay, we don't have a lot of time left today, so I'm gonna try and get through things as much as possible. So we're just gonna take some time to talk about pathways of progress and progress monitoring. I'm thinking about setting those goals, how you're progress monitoring, and how to look at that data to really determine effectiveness of your interventions. So setting that pathways goal creates that aim line for your students. So the system automatically creates a goal for any below or well below student that is above typical growth. You do not want to adjust that because you want that aim line to be steeper in order to be able to close the achievement gap. So we really are looking for goals that are ambitious, attainable, and meaningful. Ambitious because we need our below level students to start closing that achievement gap. Attainable, we want them to still be a realistic, something that the student's going to be able to achieve. And those goals should be meaningful, that reaching the goal is really going to change the student's trajectory. So this graph just is describing why we need those goals for our below level students to be above typical growth and why they really need to reach that above typical growth. So the benchmark is this yellow line. A well below student who makes typical growth is the blue line. And you can see the gap between them and the benchmark is exactly the same as when they started the year. The student who makes above typical growth is this orange line, and you can see the gap is closing between them and that benchmark. And the student who made well above typical growth actually ended up at above that benchmark cut point and has closed that achievement gap completely. So when you go in and set the goal, the system does automatically set it, like I said, but I really recommend going in and taking a look at it and seeing the areas for the individual measures that the student will be taking at your grade level and adjusting things if you feel like they need to be adjusted. So for example, if you have a student in first grade and you're going to be working on nonsense word fluency for that student, increase that nonsense word fluency and reduce maybe the ORF accuracy or the ORF retell, and really put a focus for that goal as to the area that you're really going to be focusing on and targeting for that student. So when you look at the goal, the composite score at the beginning of the year is over on the left side, and the color tells you the benchmark level. And then on the right side, you're going to see the end of year composite score and the growth for the student. And then the sliders are indicating the actual pathways. So their colors don't represent benchmarks. They represent the pathways. So well below typical growth is red. And then we have the green, which is typical, all the way up to the blue, which is well above typical growth. So the little pill bars at the end are telling you what that end of year benchmark level will be. The horizontal lines are actually the growth levels.
I noticed on the green line, one's darker than the other.
Yeah,
that-
so one is typical, the light green is typical, the dark green is above typical, and then the blue is well above typical. So if you have a student who is at below or well below benchmark, you really want them to be falling in at that above typical growth level overall. So you can see up here in this box where it says EOY composite score and growth, it's listed, the student overall is going to make above typical growth. So take a look at this goal and think, is this goal ambitious, meaningful, and attainable? If you're with other people, you're welcome to discuss it. Otherwise, just review that goal for yourself. So thinking about this goal, they're starting out at a 28 with an end of year composite score of 248. It shows them making well above typical growth in words correct and accuracy and their maze. And I would say that for most students, this is probably not attainable. If it is a student that typically makes a lot of progress or has a lot of support at home, then maybe this goal would be attainable. Definitely meaningful, it's definitely ambitious, but probably not necessarily attainable. So please go in and adjust your goals for especially your below and well below students to what is going to be most appropriate for them. Just don't ever go above that below or above typical growth. So you can adjust those goals by moving the little sliders along the pathways. If you do have highly skilled learners, we do have information about that on pages 31 and 32 in your participants notebook. The system will indicate at the middle of the year any highly skilled learner by putting a little asterisk symbol next to their pathways. So at the beginning of the year, they do not indicate it in the system in any way, but at the middle of the year, there will be a little asterisk symbol next to their pathways if they meet the highly skilled learner criteria. And these are students who may not make that typical growth because they are starting so far ahead.
So can I ask a question about setting the pathway? So it sets it for you automatically for well below and below, correct?
Yes, it sets it automatically for everybody. But if the student is below or well below, it sets the goal to be above typical progress. And if the student is at or above benchmark, it sets it at typical growth, typically, unless the student is a highly skilled learner, and then it may actually do it below typical growth.
But you want us to go in and adjust those if we think it's not attainable or if it's not ambitious enough.
I would say you adjust it, the measure level information. You don't ever want to drop it above typical growth for students who are below or typical growth for students who are at or above. But you do want to go in and just look at that individual measure information and make sure that you feel confident that this is the measure where I'm going to be putting my most time and where I want to see the most growth for my student. And maybe a different measure you would ask or put to have less growth. Because just seeing the overall growth doesn't help you look at those individual measures. And so my recommendation is you just go in and take a look at it and just make sure that everything looks good. If you have a student that you know is getting a lot of extra support at home, you might bump that goal up to being well above typical growth because they're going to be getting additional support outside of school to help them close that gap.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. I think I answered the question in the chat that was about goals. And then there was a number of questions about progress monitoring. So we're going to take a look at progress monitoring. So just a reminder about those frequency rate guidelines. Well below benchmark every 1 to 2 weeks, yellow every 2 to 4 weeks, blue and green is determined by your LEA and what they're asking you to do. So you do want to make sure you're evaluating your progress monitoring data. And if 3 consecutive data points are falling below the aim line, then that means the student is not likely to meet their goals, and you really need to look at modifying your interventions. So it's important that you're regularly reviewing that progress monitoring data. So as you're thinking about it, you can change the dosage, which be the amount of daily instruction time, the frequency or how many days a week, the intensity, which would be the number of students in the group. You also want to make sure your program's being followed with fidelity, that whoever is administering it and is that instructor, that they're doing it right, that the students are actually attending, because, you know, if they're not there, they're definitely not going to be learning, that it's focused on the correct literacy skill gap for that specific student, and that students' behavior, whether it's their own behavior or other students' behavior in the group, is not interfering with instruction. So here are the different data points. So within ALO, there are a couple of different views. You can look at the student actual assessment view and see any progress monitoring probes, and you'll be able to actually pull up and look at the individual data. You can do the progress monitoring status. So if you are on the student overview page, you can select the little drop down arrow, green arrow, and select PM status. And that's going to give you these little triangles. The triangles do not indicate in any way benchmark level. The triangles indicate progress monitoring status. So if it's green, it means the last 3 data points are above the aim line and they are predicted to meet their later goal. So this is why the aim lines in your graphs are so important, because the system is comparing that progress monitoring data to that aim line. Student who is below benchmark or well below needs to make above typical progress to close that achievement gap. So this progress monitoring is letting us know, are they likely to meet that goal? If it's yellow, the prediction can't be made because some points are above and some points are below the aim line. And if it's red, the last 3 data points are below the aim line. So you really want to be looking at those students who have red data. And if it's gray, there's not 3 progress monitoring data points, or the student has been not monitored at rate. And so there's not enough data to make a prediction. When you're doing off-grade progress monitoring, the system automatically accelerates the learning for the student. So let me pull up some data. So when we go look at these graphs for students, the graphs that do not have any color are off-grade progress monitoring. And this student, you can see the graph is data aim line is accelerated. So somebody asked how you can see the data points larger. If you come over here and select all scores on the graph page, and then just select one, it will bring it up larger with that graph all by itself, which is easier to see the data points on the specific graph. So if we look at this graph Any off-grade progress monitoring, the aim line, which is this line right here, is accelerated for half a year. And so it's providing a steeper line for that student to compare their progress monitoring data to, because if we have students off-grade progress monitoring, we don't want it to be a whole year before they move up a level in progress monitoring. We want it to only be a half year or sooner than that before they're ready to move up into that next level of progress monitoring. And so the system automatically accelerates it, and any off-grade level progress monitoring does have a graph in the system that you can use and look at to see their progress monitoring data. So this is one way to look at the progress monitoring data, is by the individual student graphs. You can also look at progress monitoring data by going to a specific class and selecting PM status. And that brings up the little triangles that you can then look at your progress monitoring data for the individual students. The next place you can look at it is if you go to the A and you're on your main dashboard. If you go down to the bottom, it will have a progress monitoring status bar, which just gives you the overall picture of how things are going in your class. And the last one would be if you have a class of students and you select all of them, you can come up here and choose View Print Student Graphs. And it's going to pull up every student's graphs. So if you wanted to do this for a group of students or a class of students, you can do that at the same time. If you choose to print it, it will print them on different pages. But that's also a way that you can review everybody's student graphs in a class or a group at the same time. I think I answered all of the questions in the chat as far as how to look at progress monitoring data. There is not the exact same types of reports that there was in ALO, or sorry, in M-Class. And so those are the views that are available to look at progress monitoring data. There isn't a way to see like just specific data points for a whole class. The only way to see data for a whole class would be to choose this print graph option. And then you would have to go in and look at the individual students. These students all have a ton of graphs because they've been enrolled in lots of progress monitoring because they're on the demo site. So your students won't have quite as many graphs as this. Let me see. Just checking real fast in the chat to see if there was any other questions about progress monitoring I had not answered yet. Okay. One question was to show enlarging the graph. So you click on the student's name. You're going to see this overview. Right underneath the overview button, there's this green drop down that says all scores. If you select that, it is going to allow you to choose a graph. So if I choose the reading composite graph, then it's the only one on the page and it's large. So if you have lots of progress monitoring data points, this is a great way to look at it. If you're doing specific off-grade progress monitoring, you can choose the off-grade progress monitoring graph that the student's involved in. And it's going to show you their progress monitoring data points, the date, and the student score. And you can see this aim line is ending in January because we want that student to finish early. Or get out of that progress monitoring before the end of the year. One thing I will show you that I really like is the add. Oh, you know what? It's not going to let me do it. Normally, maybe I have to do all scores. Normally, right here would be a add an intervention line, but because the school year has ended in our demo site, it does not let you do that. But all of these vertical dotted lines are these intervention lines. So if you have been evaluating your data and the last 3 data points are red, and you're like, we have got to make a change in our interventions for the student, put that intervention line on the graph, make that change, it records the date, and you can put in notes about what change you made. And then you can look at your data after that intervention line to see, did it make a difference? Are the scores improving after that intervention line? And so it's just a great way to track those changes in those interventions. And especially if you have a student you are determining to see if they can qualify for special education, this is a way to track interventions for those students as well. If you make your graph bigger by selecting this all scores button and just selecting the one graph, it will make it big enough on the screen that you'll be able to see those individual data points. So Amy, if you don't have students enrolled in progress monitoring, you do have to enroll students in progress monitoring in order to assess them. So you can see these students all have a little PM next to their name. That means they have been enrolled in progress monitoring. So if you select, you can do it through a group. If I know Katrina and Alvin and Willis all need the same progress monitoring, I can select them and I can choose enroll in monitoring. It's not letting me right now on the site. You can also select an individual student. And over here on the 3 little dots, you can choose PM enrollment, which will then allow you to enroll them. So they do have to be enrolled in progress monitoring in order for that to appear within the system. So you're going to choose the measure, level for oral reading fluency means grade level, and then the rate. So is it 1, 2, 3, or 4 weeks that you're going to be progress monitoring? If there are still questions about progress monitoring, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I think that I've answered everybody's. Yes. So the question was, does it look like this? It's going to be anytime a student's doing off-grade progress monitoring, the chart is going to be black and white because there are not pathways of progress for off-grade progress monitoring, only current grade. So it will just be a black and white graph that will be accelerated with the aim line being steeper and ending at the half of the year point. So that we want the student to be able to do that. And yes, you can print on any screen in the whole system to print the data that's on that screen currently. So if I go up and choose to print this, it is going to print my student graphs. If I do it when I only have one graph on the page, it will just print the one graph. Okay. I've included this is the out of grade guidelines. So please use that information for helping you determine if a student should do off grade progress monitoring or not. And then I did talk about that. Jared, do you want to just quickly mention progress monitoring regarding math?
A lot of questions I get are related to, since reading is required, but for math, progress monitoring is recommended just so that you know how students are doing as you're providing interventions, but it is optional. And typically, well, the question is, should we do it like Acadience reading? And I would say yes, as far as the amount of time and all of that should be done just following what you're doing for Acadience reading. So here I've just shown the cut points for the different, and then you're just marking progress monitoring similar to how you would for Acadience reading.
Thanks, Jared. So
And
again,
this speaks to the same thing you were talking about as far as out of grade level.
yeah.
So.
Jared, I have a question, and I'm sorry if you've already answered this. But my teachers, they're having a hard time. I guess that they're doing the progress, and I'm a reading coach, so I apologize that I don't know this, but they're asking me, but they're doing the progress monitoring like in second grade on paper pencil, and then they need to go in and enter those scores manually. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct for math.
Okay. All right. Because that's taking a lot of time, huh? But
Yes, I've heard that several times now, and I have
it's
shared
not new
it
to
with.
you.
Well, I
But-
wish I could do something about it at this point, but I have shared it with Acadience, and I've
Okay.
put it on my list of things to follow up with. So
Okay.
we'll keep
But-
working
but-
on that.
But at this time, progress monitoring is not required for Davis Schools District in math. It's just something, of course, that we know is good teaching, but not necessarily something that's being tracked by the state like Acadience reading is.
That's
Okay.
correct. Yeah, Acadience math
Okay.
is optional from a state perspective.
Yeah.
If the district
Okay.
or school require it, that's a different story.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for addressing that. Thank you.
Couple of questions in the chat. How can you see an entire grade's worth of class data? So this is underneath Miss Pope's class. So if I just select this little circle over here at the top of the class, then I can choose view print student graphs, and it's going to then bring up the graphs for my entire class that I can then just review all together, or I can print them off if I choose to. And that is a way that I can see all of my students' data and their progress monitoring data at the same time. Or if you have a group of students that is receiving interventions, you can go in and select the specific group. So if I go back to my school and I choose my group, I can then just look at this group of students and I can just see their graphs. And so if you have groups you've created for your interventions, that's a great place. The benchmarks will be on there as, so you can see the benchmark data as well as the benchmark data on a graph has a target, and then all the progress monitoring circles are just the little black circles. If you have a student who is at a higher grade, but is being progress monitored at a lower grade, I would progress monitor at that material, the material that aligns with their instruction. Grade level progress monitoring is not going to be very valuable because the student's going to make very little progress and they're just going to find it frustrating for that. Benchmarks are always given at grade level because that's where we're doing a comparison at that grade level to really see if the student is at benchmark or below that and needs additional support, and what pathways they are making in comparison to their peers who started the year with the same composite score in the same grade level. Yes, you will be able to see the sub-measure pathways of progress when you go in and look at and choose a specific time of year. Oh, this is not showing it because of the data. When you go to the individual student graphs, it's going to show you that data for every individual student and what pathway they made on individual measures. Okay, we are out of time today. So let me drop a survey in the chat. Please fill out that form and that will give you credit for attending today and a certificate. And then please do reach out if you have additional questions. Jared and I are happy to answer them.